Welcome to another episode of the Coaching Collective podcast, the community for coaches by coaches. Now here are your hosts, Ed Hamilton and Paul Blackford.
What happens if someone comes in pain?
I think you remember when we did the first initial talk that we were going to do with MAP, and that was going to be like our thing. We were going to go to all the other gyms, and I did that presentation, and literally the first question we asked was like, what do you do when you have a client in pain? Tell me your problem solving ability, because like I've been thinking about these episodes, and now that we've had so many awesome conversations, and like the goal is to continue to have more conversations with coaches and hearing different stories and different angles that are coming through. Like I thought the more that we do these ones of just me and you, honing back in like the stuff we were talking about of like diving into our space a little bit more and giving the audience maybe a little bit more like practical takeaways. Because I know we talked about, okay, maybe we should discuss like onboardings, initial assessments into initial programming, okay, back end stuff, like just giving some context to what it actually is like being an in-person coach training clients. And I think...
Didn't you say this week that I think it was off the back of our conversation about Sam yesterday, that it's interesting to have someone who's quite capable come in and just be able to start driving stimulus rather than honing in on a joint that's dysfunctional or pain. Let's say pain.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing to have happened this week if we're going to talk about what do you do if someone comes in.
It was just that, like I said, that conversation when we did that initial seminar chat thing with the crew, doing the presentation from the stuff that we'd gone through with Active Life. And it was like, I could guarantee, I'd probably say 100% of trainers have had a moment in the gym where their client says, this hurts. And it's, what's your response? What's your response to that? And what you do next is actually quite important for many things, not only the physical thing of not making something, trying to not make that thing hurt anymore, but also
it's the
psychological thing for how your client then perceives that movement or movements that are like this.
Coming to the gym.
Or coming to the gym, especially early on, or if it's a consistent thing, which some of the answers were and have been from people that we've spoken about. I just stopped that exercise. It's like, okay, well, that's a never ending, like, where do you stop there? Because you're going to be, like we talked about, you're going to be limited, and we can get into that, but...
Let's get into it.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to talk to you about. And I wanted to talk to you about because it's both the realms that we live in. As I said, I'd like these podcasts now to be a little bit more practical from our point of view, and we can talk to other trainers and listen to stories, but no one needs to hear our stories 5 times. And they're probably going to hear our stories again as we go through this in our background. But I wanted to talk more about, because obviously, again, on that, not talking about stories, but my background, your background, very different to onboarding. I, as people would know if they've listened to this, came through almost the world of let's solve the pain problem from day one. Like we are looking at dysfunction through the lenses that Dan gave us. And here is a skill set, how you go about from his exercise phys background. Here's how you're going to use movement to correct that. So I feel mine's a little different because I don't know if I ever had not, what's the right word, like fear of it, or I've always just seen it as a challenge versus, oh my God, they're in pain. Are they going to be okay? Is it like, have I like blown a disc, or have I like torn their shoulder, or is it like, what have I done? Yeah. And I think you were talking about, and I know Sam will be probably fine with us talking about it, as she always talks about shit, like wanting to share knowledge, share information and getting those stories out. So I know you guys have had a few good chats about that, particularly when she first started, but I'd probably like to get your input on it from your lens of when you first started coming in and being like, okay, what was my, maybe, you probably can't remember your first experience with it, but maybe the first couple of times you're like dealing with clients and what you initially went to, and then we can not maybe say what you are now, but like processes like going forward and what you've done about it.
So I have, like, for myself, but this is like an overlay filter for my clients, 3 primary principles or 3 primary values for my client training and my training. And number 1 is remain injury free. But that's an unrealistic, as a pure value, that's an unrealistic expectation. Injuries happen, and I think this is where my story comes in, is that I didn't start in an exercise physiologist or a physio who is dealing with a lot of like injuries and pain. I actually started in the industry as in CrossFit actually. So it's people coming in to train to get fitter and healthier, and so all of those standard things. But as you train more and more people, and I think I started to really connect with those who didn't want to come in and train because of injury or because of pain. And so I think I started to really lean into you can, because there's other things that you can do. And that has inevitably led to me learning about what to do. A massive game changer was Active Life, beginning of COVID, when we took on the assessment and started to develop MAP because of the rules for pain. They had that structure of 4 out of 10 and remaining at or under a 4 out of 10, and using that to guide your choices for that day or progress for that person. So that in itself has just been a game changer, and was the first place that I went to with Summer when she brought up my clients, or some of my clients are feeling pain. What do I do? How do I determine what's okay and what's not? I think my language has changed in regards to communications to my clients a lot over time, in and around pain. I think a big part of what we did was actually the vocabulary, or the pain talk, pain language, understanding what it is, understanding what is discomfort versus pain, tension versus pain, all those other words that can be used to describe sensations that you're feeling during movement and training. Because there's this stigma around new people coming in and just talking about everything hurts. Oh, that hurts. Is it work or is it injury? Oh, it's work. Okay, cool. So maybe not hurt. Maybe we're just talking about work there.
Yeah.
Discomfort, etc. That too has a big impact on that client's relationship with movement and relationship with that pain. 7, 8 years on now, for me, I'm a lot more comfortable having someone who's in pain in front of me. That was not a comfortable place to be early on. That was scary.
Can you remember like scenarios where you had people like just training, everything was going good, and then they're like, something happened and you were run us through that, because that's like, I guess what a lot of, like we said at the start, a lot of trainers are going to be in that scenario. Like 100% that's happened to I reckon every single trainer has had that experience. And we talk a lot about biomechanics, we talk a lot about movement, we talk a lot about assessments, pain, optimizing movement, but it's at the end of the day, we always talk about it, like you're working with a human body. You do need to have some understanding of those things, minimal or a lot, but at the end of the day, if I'm working with a body, you're working with a body, the person down the road is a PT, they're working with a body, like you're all doing that same thing. We'll discuss and go into detail, and even people at the gym will whatever laugh at us because we go into so much of it, but it's truly, it's just a deep, like having an enjoyment of a deeper understanding, so to solve higher problems that we kind of talk about. But at a base level, I'd like to get out of today some actionable things that people can do. Yes, our experiences, but okay, here would be my like go-to. But yeah, going back to like your experience, if you can remember like a first time or whatever.
Yeah, so I've got a few clients who are backs. I'll call them backs because backs have been their issue. So back pain, lower back pain, and look, whatever the physiology is around what's going on. I'm not qualified, so I'm not going to go into that
Scope.
But let's just say pain. They're experiencing pain. I had one client who had a significant incident in a session with me, to the point where he did a dead ball lift over shoulder, and he ended up on the floor. He could not move. So his wife had to come and pick him up. She had to drive up to the gym, literally back the car into the gym. I had to pick him up. He could not move. He was in agony. So that significant incident then led to, he came back in. It was probably a good couple of weeks before he came back in, but thankfully he trusted in my process, which I actually didn't have much of a process at that point. That was just, I think early on, I was just, and I still am, a very conservative trainer, in that it's definitely not, she'll be right, mate. It's actually like lots of checking in regards to, hey, maybe that doesn't work, but let's try this. Maybe that doesn't work, let's try this. And always just butting up to the edges of that pain or discomfort, but not actually re-injuring or having another incident that's going to put him on the floor. I haven't had anything that serious in that it's kept anyone out of the gym a pretty significant amount of time. But the subsequent sessions were literally going back into standard strength training, but with load mitigation, potentially movement alterations to steer them away from triggers. We've learned a lot more about this. I've definitely done a lot more learning retrospectively or post those incidents and looked back at them and gone, I understand more about that now. And then I understand why some of the decisions I made to do what I did were actually good in line with at least the protocols and information that we've taken on in and around that.
Yeah. I think there's like a couple of things there in regards to like the practical thing, just that you said at the end, is okay, I've had someone that's had an injury, they're coming back and I mitigated like these 2 or 3 things. One might be like range of motion, 2 might just be load management, and then 3 might be like tempos and the way that I'm moving, or like putting emphasis on certain parts of movements. So if I can't train full range, I can train partial range and challenge the loading parameters of that position if I'm not going to be able to get into like access all of those positions. And I think that's a really important thing, particularly if we're going to go from you have no understanding of pain, you're just a brand new trainer, and say someone is doing a squat, or let's run maybe with the squat, and they're like, man, that really hurts my knee. Okay, in that session, as we said, like your next steps are pretty important, like saying directly right now, what do you do with that person? And I think those parameters are something that are quite handy to just have in the tool belt if you don't really know anything else about what's going on. Let's think about, okay, can I get them to limit the range of motion? And for right now, does that decrease the pain so they can get through the session? And then, like you said for yourself, I didn't really have much information, and it's something that we've spoken about with other trainers, but you had enough care to go and look into and figure out, okay, cool, I'm gonna need to go and actually like work out what's going on here. So I think something like initially you've got client, the squatting, got some knee pain, look at range of motion, look at tempo. So can I put more tension on the muscle potentially? Are they just like dropping into position and that's why they're loading more structure than function? And then obviously looking at load management. So maybe load, range, tempo. Those would be like 3. If you're listening to this and again, you're a new trainer or even experienced trainer and these things keep popping up and you don't really know, there's an immediate thing that you can do to manage the physical things, but also the psychological things like you talked about, where it's like, if your answer to that, like we've said before, is stop squatting, all of a sudden you're going to have this like fear association with squats. And then it's your duty of care in that to make sure that you then go and, like you were saying, we said for you, you go and think about, okay, why would my client potentially be having knee pain? If you just take away movements, and this might lead us into maybe some of the education you've done when we've done with like active life, and we could talk about how maybe after these like real initial things of like, how do I have, you know, like I said, with no understanding really of a lot of anatomy or biomechanics, and I've got someone in pain, I've got maybe some tools here that I can use. You then need to build this stuff like you were talking about into your onboarding. And it's like having the initial conversations with clients and having some structures around that you can bring up when scenarios like this kind of happen. And like load versus capacity is obviously the one that we talk about the most. But again, I want these chats with me and you to be like, what do we practically do with people? Not just like our experience, but this is A, B, C, D thing that I'm going to do with someone when they come in, or post-injury or whatever it may be. First of all, like I said, think about load management. So just my knee hurts, I'm squatting. Okay, just drop the 12 for a second, pick up the 8. Cool. That feel okay? Yeah, that feels better. Sweet. Today we're just going to stay there. Then we're going to look at addressing things in the background. If you can make a change like that, again, talk about like building trust, and that's such a great way for you and your client to build a better relationship there. Or range of motion, hey, you're getting to there, maybe let's just whack the med ball under the hips for now, or get to the box and squat a little bit, and then that's not working. Okay, cool. Let's try the range of motion with the tempo on the decreased load. Because that way you still have them squatting. That way you don't have them fear associating that there's something wrong with the movement of a squat. And that obviously is a knee example with the back. And it could be all the same stuff, right? All those things would work as you come into it. But then like we said, okay, outside of that, and even if you're maybe in the gym instructing scenes at the moment and you're in a group class with a lot of people, those would be 3 really good tactics to use. Like straight away when you're in class, you got 2 minutes with someone before you got to jump into the next person.
You got just to give to the group. There's potential for maybe a few people in that class have mentioned something on the way in or of their history. And so just as a blanket, you say, everybody here's the movement for today. And if anyone is feeling uncomfortable with this, we're just going to do it to here.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a really.
I think also in that, like the psychology, you say transitioning a little bit from coaching to say group classes, like then the whole, I still feel like I'm doing the same thing as everyone else. Not like, oh, you're going to go over there and just ride the bike.
Yeah.
And then everyone's on the racks squatting and you're just like, it's irrelevant. Bit off track there. But I think it's getting into the next parts of us and what we took on to then and talk about like MAP, which was like really clever acronym for like movement assessments and improvement progress.
Protocol.
Yeah.
Mate.
Programs?
Mate.
Protocols? Do we even know we don't even know what it's called. But
A program, yeah.
from there, like we said, like COVID hit and it was a good chance for like reflection. And one of the things we've spoken about before at the time when I had Carter as a coach was being on videos with him and we were just working through some stuff and he was like, how would you take your business online? I'm like, man, I don't know. Like, how do you take in-person movement assessment work and stuff like into that space? And then, as you said, luckily at the time, the company called Active Life put out one of their seminars for free, just as like, here guys, here's something to do during the time, which was amazing. And it was around their like movement assessments and pain talks and tendon health and all this stuff that was in their load versus capacity, understanding pain. And that really changed the game for us in regards to just framework. So stuff we always talk about, like how to make a decision based off more information that I have, but also preempting things with clients, being able to have clearer communication as to, how did we get here? How does an injury occur? We can talk a little bit later as we dive into the prescript stuff as to what is an injury, and being in this space, you're obviously looking at the things that you need to look at, so your knowledge continues to grow like anything. But yeah, maybe go through like how that sort of changed a lot of things for you in your onboarding with clients. Like, so maybe like from an actual practical thing, like what do? You have a new client, they come in, what's like the first things? You've obviously got their information, their details, you can go through that as well. And then
I think understanding what pain is important. I've got different clients in regards to their tolerance around discomfort and pain. I've got clients who are very tolerant, potentially too tolerant, and clients who are not very tolerant. And getting to know your client and what pain potentially is to them is important, because it's not going to be the same for every person. So your filter as a coach is whatever you feel. Say you've done a workout and it's this hard, that doesn't mean that's what that's going to feel for another person. It just doesn't, based on capacity, but also based on this tolerance for discomfort. So pain tolerance is one thing, but pain is a warning system. So it advises the body that there's potentially, and that's a big important word, potentially something that's going to go wrong, as in there potentially is something wrong or potentially something going to go wrong. So that's a warning system, that then the reaction to that is to steer away from whatever that's going to be, that movement or that insult, that danger.
Yeah, I think the best way I've heard that is it's your body talking to you it's about a behavioral change, right? So it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong.
No.
It's not, I feel a bit in my knees. Have I got a torn ACL? Have I got like this meniscus? Have I got this disease that I don't even know about? It's just there was an input. So I loaded my leg. The output was my knee didn't like that because I used a bit too much structure.
Yeah.
And again, we can dive into that and how that comes about. But I think that's a really important thing of like, pain isn't always negative in regards to, it's just a signal of your body saying input, output. You did something and here's the result of that.
And part of the psychology of working through that with your client is getting them to understand that it's a part of the process. It's not something that we shouldn't feel or shouldn't experience. In fact, it's actually something that's going to guide us through that healing process or through that improvement process, because it's a great teacher in regards to things that you can and can't do, should and shouldn't do. But understanding it is important. That's one of the biggest things that I've implemented into my pain management part of what I do, is actually talking to them more about how important a role it plays in actually being there and actually listening to you, using it and listening to your body.
I think if sticking with the active life stuff, they like you said the word and it just reminded me of, they say insult is like an unnoticed discomfort or sensation. Sensation. So like the example they use is like, right now me and you are sitting in this chair and the chair is insulting our bum. And okay, what does that mean? It's if I was to stop and sit here for 90 minutes, my ass, like you're sitting on a plane or something, your ass would be like, this is getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I need to get up and I need to change. And it's that whole thing of the behavior of sitting. It's slow, but it's starting to create an insult. I'm not aware of it. Then it becomes an irritation. So the way they label it was like insult, and then down below that was irritation, which is just you recognize that there's something going on. So it's come into the forefront and being like, okay, just like sitting on the chair for an extended period of time. And I really like this example. You would just get up and you would change the behavior that you're doing. Like, I need to get off my ass because it's asleep, right? Yeah. And I think that's a really good analogy in the same way that we just spoke about with pain, which is like, when I press that dumbbell overhead and my shoulder doesn't like it, it's like, I need to change something here. Yeah. And a lot of that comes back to the initial conversation of when you don't know those kind of 3 steps, right? Maybe change the range of motion, maybe go from a vertical to maybe a landmine to a bell, whatever you can do, right? All those things that we've already spoke about. But as you understand the mechanics better, which we'll get into as we dive into that, you can look at the training. Then this is when it gets into your training of how you're going to start to work on improving that irritation to stop your client believing that they have something wrong with their shoulder, right? So the pain that they say is like insult, unaware, irritation, you become aware of something. Pain being the negative emotional response to that irritation. I have got bad shoulders. And then this is when we talk about like the psychology of it, like, I have bad shoulders. Yeah. And it's like, okay, and I really talk to a lot of my clients about this, and I know you do as well, but these are really important chats to have. It's so important, as we said at the start, that some people don't take a lot of notice of anatomy work and working with bodies. We take a big dive down into that because it's something that's really important, but it's like, that sentence puts none of the control in their hands. Yeah. I have a bad shoulder.
They are.
What do you do? It's definitive, right? It's like a fixed mindset.
They are a prisoner to fate.
Right.
Like, I have no control. This is what it is.
And then that's when they say the injury is the I can't do that overhead press. I can't wash my hair and put the shampoo in my hair with my right shoulder. I have to do it with my left shoulder. Yeah. And it's like the I can't is the injury. Yeah. But take a step back from what we said, where it's like the pain is the negative emotional response to the language that they talk about of, oh, I've got bad knees. Okay. Now, as we start to go through the assessment part of that, and we understand, okay, biomechanics, what things should happen, or talking about the active life stuff from passive range of motion to active range of motion, but taking almost like where we are now with it, it's if you can understand what that joint should do, its function, the way it operates, the way that shoulder blade should move, the conversation you can have is so much easier with your client because, like, you don't have a bad shoulder. You have a shoulder that doesn't upwardly rotate very well, or you have a shoulder that doesn't retract and depress very well. Okay, cool. Guess what? We're in a gym. We have all these tools that we can use, exercises that we have to work on those things. So all of a sudden it's, okay, when I talk to my guys, it's like understanding and teaching them, this is what we should see from a shoulder. And again, taking into considerations, and we'll get into like load versus capacity, like anatomical dysfunctions, right? Have you had a labrum tear? Have you just got hypermobile joints? Have you got like all these things that you have to take into account? But at the end of the day, you go, okay, that shoulder should do this and this, right? It should upwardly rotate, externally rotate and flex. You should downwardly rotate, internally rotate and extend, protract, retract. It should do all those things. So if we can just start in some capacity at doing those, seeing where you're at with it, where can we work at the moment where you can't fully get into, say, that overhead position, for using that for an example. Okay, cool. What can you do? I can bench, or I can dip support, or I can, and along that, we can start to look at our programming and think of that. It's jumping a little bit ahead, but
yeah, if someone comes in with something new, the first thing, is a new injury, or if there's something acute happens in class or in a session I assess, first thing, you've got to assess to see where that injury is and basically what the trigger is.
And this would be like, I'm just trying to framework it for someone new. This is, you've had them in, I do a 30 to 45 minute consult, and I just run through all the theory. And then I'm like, now we're going to take this theory and we can talk about the specifics of the theory into the assessment. Yeah. So maybe before we get to that assessment, like, you run through maybe what you would talk about. If there's anything other than we haven't talked about, I might talk about that, and then we'll talk about assessments. Well, what do you talk about with when you onboard your clients? So they come in, or I know you do a lot of it online.
In regards to
Yeah, because I know you
injury?
sit down and I've seen you like do the whiteboard stuff and like you'll go through.
Yes. Load versus capacity. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So load versus capacity is
because that's going to lead into an assessment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's, I guess, the framework that I talk mostly about life and where training fits into life, and that they have to consider it's a stressor, and so it's going to put loads on their system that are adding to loads that life puts on their system. And I do get frustrated with how often I go through that particular thing, and it's something I revisit a lot.
I revisit all the time
because they forget. And
yeah, but they'll be having conversations with me, basically talking about the model of load versus capacity, and then I just draw it on the whiteboard. And I go, this is what you're talking about. Remember we talked about this like 2 years ago? It's the same thing. And then we can go on. But yeah.
So load versus capacity. Generally, as they're getting into their training, like I think my initial onboarding is outside of the gym. It's rapport, it's trust, starting to build that trust through not action within the gym, but through making sure that they know I understand. It happened yesterday. I was speaking to a lady who's coming in with osteoporosis, and it's severe enough that she's on drugs to mitigate that. So she just needed to know that I wasn't just going to be like, oh yeah, I've got that covered, don't worry.
Yeah.
It's fine. She needed to know, and through example, and I haven't trained anyone with osteoporosis, not that severe anyway. And so she needed to know that I understood what it was, that I was going to take things very slowly. And there's other stuff going on that aligns with some of the other clients I've had. So it's through experiences that I've been able to say, okay, I've done this with this person, I've done this with this person, these have been the responses, and that's exactly how I feel with. So just linking and connecting those experiences with what she expects.
Yeah.
So that's outside of the gym. She hasn't even come inside the gym yet. When she gets in, she's going into a small group. She's actually going into a small group with some other similar bodies that experience similar things. So need that same level of movement, same level of load, ranges, etc. So she won't feel left out, and they'll be encouraging because they've seen the benefits. So that's great. But I will be having her in by herself for a couple of sessions before she goes into those groups, because the last time she trained in a gym was 30 years ago. Things have changed, and who knows what she remembers. But those couple of sessions that she's going to have give me an opportunity to have a look at how she moves and whether she's actually moving around any of her discomfort, if she's feeling discomfort. But I dare say that's going to be a bit of a telltale in regards to that's the assessment. I'm going to start moving her through some standard upper and lower body warm-ups and basic mechanics. What does a squat look like? How are you hinging, etc. And just to see her proprioception and how you treat a normal body, but just looking for feedback in regards to how that feels.
Similar. I'll do an onboarding through like the website, which has the questionnaire. People can fill in for a 30 to 45-minute consult. Get that, touch base, book them in for that, and then prior to the consult, I'll send them like the questionnaire all about background. So what is it that you're experiencing? How long? What have you tried? Just trying to get as much information around what are your hobbies? What do you do for work? Just get as much information out of them as I can to understand where this is coming from, like sporting backgrounds, anything like that. And then in those initial consults for me, it's a really big opportunity, particularly with Odyssey. I talk about it being an education and mentorship program more so than training. Yeah, we will get to training, but the goal that I set for every single one of my clients is, as we've said before, for them to feel that they can do this by themselves, whatever that timeline looks like. 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 4 years, 10 years. That's your own personal journey, but the goal is to get all my guys there. So they need to know all the information that I know. So I don't hold back in regards to like set the standard for that in regards to there's going to be a lot of information. We start off with that conversation around like load versus capacity, so understanding how injuries occur regarding it's not necessarily the straw on the camel's back, the last thing that you've done. It's like you said, it's an accumulation of stresses. Those stresses can be from, as we said before, like they'll say anatomical dysfunctions, being like some part of your body that isn't the way it once was. So you might have had a hip replacement, like we were talking about that with your client the other day, or a shoulder surgery, or you might just have a funny shaped bone in your elbow or something, right? And these are all going to play a role in movement, limitations, how a position is going to be putting more stress on you on that side than the other, all these things. We'll talk about sleep, diet, stress, the impacts of all the things outside of the gym that have a role. That way down the line, you have a client that rocks up and they've had 3 hours sleep because they've got kids. And you're like, great. This is like what we talked about before with coaching versus programming. We're going to change this session. And we're going to manage it based on that because we understand this concept of load versus capacity. And then we'll talk about functional diagnosis and being where that assessment stuff lives and training lives, which is, this is my role. This is our role as a trainer in regards to, I'm here to improve how well, basically, I say you can get in and out of positions. So again, the way that something functions better, it costs you less energy to move that shoulder overhead because the shoulder is doing what it should do. So you don't have to load tissues around that are potentially what will cause you pain. And don't ever have to go into that detail, but I basically just explain like that's our role. That's where we're going to live. It's the box that we're going to have an impact on. And then with that model, we talk about those are your pre-existing loads. And then the rest of it, before you get over that line, is your needs and your wants. Going to work, sorting out the kids at home or just housework, and then you go and for a surf, and then you go for all right, cool, now it's time to go to the gym, and you start running and box jumps, and then you do your first lunge, and all of a sudden it's like, there it is. And it's okay, cool. This comes to that conversation of now it's like, how did we get there? And then we talk about understanding scope. So as a trainer, I'm not there to redo the surgery on your replaced hip. That's not my role, right? It's to go, okay, I live in this box, which is the functional diagnosis box, which is how can I improve that position for you to have more capacity to be able to handle those loads that you're doing, right? So then we'll go, okay, cool, that's where we're going to start. So we'll talk about load versus capacity. That's basically like how an injury happens, as we spoke about. And then I guess through the learnings of pre-script before that, the biggest thing in regards to that functional diagnosis box that I love how these two things blend in is how they established what an injury is, right? Like the equation or biomechanical equation for what an injury is when applied forces become greater than the tissue tolerance. And so the example I'll use with my clients is like you cut yourself with a knife in the kitchen, the knife applied force was greater than the tolerance of the skin, so you get a cut, right? All the way till I got hit by a bus. And the bus was, applied force was greater than basically every bone in my body, and my tissues couldn't tolerate that applied force. And so everything lives on the spectrum from there to there. So when we understand those two things, okay, what is an injury? It's when you're applying too much force to an area. How do injuries occur? If you don't move very well and you try to do complex movements, or you've got a lot of stresses going on, and then you come into the gym and we're doing certain movements and you start loading into positions that you don't have access to, you're putting applied forces on tissues that just don't have the tolerance. I.e., the examples that we've already used, I did the squat, my knee hurt. Okay, you're resting in your structure. Why are you resting in your structure? Why can't you load your quads, or why can't you load your glutes? Or the press overhead. Yeah, I feel it like in the front of my shoulder, just always here, like at the front. It's okay, cool. You probably have a shoulder blade that's not moving, right? You probably have an underactive serratus and all this stuff that we talk about from the biomechanical side of things. It makes this problem solving much easier when you can understand the body. So again, coming back to that. So these are all the conversations that I have. I'll talk a little bit about movement hierarchy. So we need passive range first. We need active ranges after that. We'll talk a little bit about structural balance. So all of those things kind of align. Structural balance being like, okay, when I'm doing that overhead movement, I need to balance on a micro level between all the muscles that play a role in that movement of my shoulder. And again, like I said, if I've got overactive muscles and underactive muscles, I have muscles that are doing too much and getting too much force applied to them. I'm getting muscles that are getting underdeveloped and not enough force applied to them. And then I get this structural balance all out of whack, and then I have discomfort in my shoulder. Active Life have changed that model, and they'll put the recovery at the bottom now, which kind of makes sense in regards to when you talk about the load versus capacity graph. They're saying that sleep, diet, stress is the second most important thing, so I get that. But the very top of the pyramid, when we put that out into food pyramid shape of, say, recovery now, passive ranges, active ranges, structural balance, the thing that's at the top of that, and you hear us going back and forth between pressing overhead or a squat, is a skill. And the skills are fucking really irrelevant, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. There's a prerequisite thing that you need to be able to do. There's a functional diagnosis that you need to have. There's a biomechanical way that your body should be moving. And if it's not, these are how pain occurs. These are how, bringing it all back, these are how you get irritations, how you get noticeable things going on in the system. And then your response to that is the pain, as we said. Your emotional response to that is the pain. If you can, particularly when you're working with someone in this space of getting them out of pain, if you can have those rules that we talked about, like pain no more than a 4 out of 10, if you're doing a certain exercise and it stays at there, great. If it gets less, awesome. If it starts to creep up, cease the exercise. What's the 48-hour window like? So you do some training with your client, you've managed that pain, 48 hours later, you're checking in, how's the rest of that time been? You've got all these parameters around it. Like, one, your client feels, I guess, secure in what you're doing. If you do have a mistake and you do too much or you have a flare-up, you can have open communication around, okay, too much load versus capacity. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the ranges that maybe we were working in and that you might have not had that ability to get there. And all these conversation points that I can have with my clients before we even get them doing anything. We just make that path really clear. So here's how injuries occur. Also, this is what an injury is. This is how injuries occur. This is what makes up movement. Now let's go take all this theory and turn it into skill, right? And turn it into action and get you in the gym and have a look at those things. And that's, I guess, where you were talking about, like, I get them in and I'm going to start to look through movements. I'm going to squat with them. I'm going to lunge with them. And this is something that's, I think, really cool as well, because like we've obviously done a fair bit of similar stuff. And then it kind of diverses into what your particular thing is. So like for me, I probably go through the assessment a little bit more in the rehabby space where I'm going to get them on the bench and I'm going to look at the Thomas test and I'm going to look at the 90-90 and then I'm going to look at some shoulder flexion stuff. And that has compressed a ton from the amount of crap that I used to do. Crap being just things are more alike than they are different. So like, how do I reduce redundancies? And like the terminology they use with that is like a factory analysis. If I've got things that are like, I don't need to do anymore, how do I get this person training? Because that's what they came here to do at the end of the day. Yeah, I know it's like rambling on a little bit about like exactly what we do, but I just want people to understand that it's really important because again, we come back to like, you're working with the human body. If we can help you listening to this podcast and we'll leave the references to like in the show notes again to like the companies that we've worked with and you know how we've gotten ourselves to here. And there's been heaps of other stuff that was like non-intentional study with Squat University and all these great like free online sources that you can go to and dive into. But it just helps with your framework as how you look at everything.
Quite a refined process that you've got there. That's been built through many iterations of assessment and onboarding and business model and like lots of paths have led you here. I'm just going to ask you about, go back right to the start where you started at ROM and like you'd always been dealing with people coming in with pain. That was the jam. How did the CrossFit, because ROM was doing training athletes in CrossFit, and that's not necessarily, sure, CrossFit can cause pain, but that's not necessarily those particular clients.
CrossFit can cause pain.
It will.
It will.
But those clients, those athletes weren't coming in for pain, they were coming in for performance, to train performance, not train out of pain. But maybe just talk a little bit about that overlap in regards to training people at ROM. Were you training athletes as well? I know you were training as an athlete.
A few, and I would have majority of people that were coming would be the general pop. The people that were doing the athletic stuff, like trying to train for regionals and that, were coming in and pretty much just doing their own programming. And then there would be times when they'd be working with an individual coach, Bryn or Dan, myself. But I think the majority of the people that I was working with was general pop. And when it was like, say, working in that lens, we would have people that came in that would be fine. They wouldn't have necessarily issues or anything. But it was just a framework, again, that we looked at. And we've spoke to Dan on the podcast. Maybe it wasn't in the second one that we actually recorded, the first one, how we talked about like the range of motion model of health. Yeah. I think we did maybe talk about it, right? We said like someone is only as good as their weakest point.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like automatically, it's like the whole functional diagnosis thing that we talked about. Like the weakest point on that graph that he has is your shoulder mobility. You can't snatch because you can't get your arm over your head. Okay, forget snatching for a second. Let's just get your arm moving better overhead. And we did it through PNF stretching and all this stuff and these movements. And there was, it's hard to remember, but like from that stuff, like the main hands-on stuff was a lot of like hands-on release work. Yeah. And that was quite interesting coming into a background of never doing that with anyone. And I'd say outside of scope, just like another part of your toolkit. And it's coming from someone coaching you down who's an exercise phys that's got, they're not letting you skip any parts with it. So I think that was probably the main thing that I talk about when I say it was a little bit different maybe from someone else just coming into the gym and looking at like, I just got people that want to come in and train. The only difference would be the framework that you're doing, which most people would come in and go, I want to lose weight, I want to look good, I want to get a little bit fitter. You're not really, if we're saying to this to newer coaches, you're not really taking on specific cases straight up, I would assume. Most people, right? You're not like, yeah, cool, I'm coming to see you. I got to run like a sub 5 minute this and I need like these specific things, right? You probably start training people that you know as a starting point, and you're like literally just experimenting with things that you do as training. And you're like, cool, our goal is to make you feel better. And yeah, look, we've been training for 6 months and aesthetically you've lost a little bit of weight. The belt size has come down. It's like fantastic. And that is honestly probably 80 to 90% of people, I would say, that come in, maybe even more, that's generally their framework that they're looking at as soon as they come into the industry. That's what I mean by comparing where we are now from our starting point. Is mine was just like, what's the limiting factor for you? And a lot of the times, as we know now, when people come in, it's like, they don't move very well. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I just started there and then we implemented it with CrossFit things. So it's like, all right, cool. In this session that it's supposed to be, like Dan would have all the whole My Fitness File thing was great because you just have a drop down box of movement alternatives. Yeah. So it's like, all right, this workout's supposed to be power snatches with the barbell and burpees. Yeah. But from this drop down box, we're going to do kettlebell snatches or we're going to do dumbbell snatches. Because you can get in the position single arm, you just struggle with double arm because your thoracic extension starts. Yeah. It's, okay, cool. You still get a dumbbell snatch. You still get to move something from the ground to overhead. And in the interim, we're going to go onto the table after our session and we're going to work on your thoracic extension. Yeah. And that was just what we did and what I did for 5 years there. Yeah, cool. And so that was just like ingrained.
Great intro, great learning.
So fortunate. In regards to being then passionate about the space to continue, you could be in that space and like that could be a very small part of it and you're just more keen on the training part. I just took a liking to the fact that I could help someone see massive improvements without needing to train super hard. You know what I mean? Like not that it was about getting away from training super hard, but just other ways that you could
there's another way.
Yeah, there's another way. Yeah, and not getting them stalling. And I think that was also probably because of my experience with injuries. Is like I would train, like I said to you before, for 3 months, get injured, and then just rehab. Train well for 3 months, get injured. And it was just like, understanding it now, it's like the whole applied forces and tissue tolerance and capacity. And like the knowledge that you have now, it's like, great, because I don't have wrists that don't move. So more force goes on my shoulder and all this stuff. Yeah, I get it. I understand. Like I just didn't have that innate capacity. Some people have just the handle tolerance of, they might move like crap. And we talked about that with like athletes when they say they're great compensators. I just don't ever think I was very athletic. Like I couldn't compensate out of positions, but that's what drove me to thinking more about like movement proficiency because I couldn't afford to get out of position. Still can't, still got like talk about the lower back stuff and all that. Like I have to be really solid with what I'm doing. Yeah. And that just like dictates where I go with training, but not to like probably tangent too much about specifics.
Oh yeah, I know. I was just thinking about like allied health professionals and that actually being an important discussion with those people coming in with pain as well. Because if that situation is something that does need the support of an allied health professional, and I think in saying that, that's quite an interesting way to put it because it's usually I feel like the world or the industry sees it the other way around. They see a personal trainer as supporting an allied health professional in doing what they're doing. And we talk a lot about, hang on, that first point of call is like, your clients trust you immensely. And if you say to them, hey, this is actually a situation where we do need an assessment from an AHP because there's potentially something that needs surgical intervention or something like that. And it's, okay, one of the things that processes I've developed into my practice is if there is an allied health professional who needs to be involved, or if that person, that client, wants to or has the desire to make sure that issue, that insult or that injury is covered off by an allied health professional, all for that. 100%, absolutely do it. But I want to be involved and in communication with that allied health professional. I want there to be, we're a team now. That's not something that, oh, you're just doing that with that person and I'm just doing my thing with you. I'm like, as soon as you engage that person, I want them to know what I'm about and what my practice is about and why I do feel like that movement is still an important part of that person's rehabilitation life, social life, all the mental health, all the positive things. So
that's super important.
I need them to know that is important part of that person's life, just so that they don't go, oh, you've got this thing.
6 weeks, nothing.
Don't go to the gym. Don't do your PT.
Because it's immediately like it's a red flag, and it's, hold on, I'm not the red flag.
No.
Movement's not the red flag.
It sucks because the world has become this place where just there's a blanket view of our industry as, hey, you know what? It's safer for me as a doctor, a GP, or a physio, or a chiro to just say no. To just say, hey, you know what? It's going to be so much simpler because I can't control what you do in the gym. It's going to be so much simpler for me if you just don't do that. Yeah. And unfortunately for that person, it's potentially slowing down their recovery. It's potentially not doing them any more favors, especially if it's taken them a moment to build up the courage or the funds or the momentum to get in the gym and actually start having some wins.
And that's the thing when we want to do a podcast like this, is there are a lot of aspects to train that we talk about with coaching people. And particularly diving into the space of that. And the other thing is, we'll talk about upskilling in this certain area and potentially trying to give some feedback or some things that people can take away from that. But it's, if you're a trainer and you're in that space, and I don't know if it's already happened to you or preempting that it can potentially happen to you, you might just lose a client.
No.
Because you didn't have the know-how in any aspect to take that on. So what do? They go and see the person that does, which is their trustee physio chiro, and they're going to base off their suggestion, and absolutely they should, because you don't have any of the answers. And it's in that scenario, I would agree, if the physio's you need to do this, because they can't be confident to push you back into where you were. So I just think, like, at the end of the day, they need, and we come back to it, education and this and that, but if you're getting into it or you're into it, and I would highly recommend that you do some course in human anatomy, biomechanics, something that's going to teach you about this. Something that's just going to give you a really nice base level knowledge about it and the application to training in that. And there's so many things out there that we could talk about. Obviously the ones we have with Active Life, Prescript's pretty in depth, but even the one that Cal is doing at the moment with Sebastian Oreb, the Australian strength coach, really nice, like human anatomy and application into benching and squatting, and something that's going to give you a little bit more confidence to understand the matrix of the thing that you're looking at underneath the hood.
Because it's one of the things that I don't believe there's enough in the standard Cert 3, Cert 4. There's not enough of that. I reckon.
And I think that's
a big ticket item.
Not to go too much deeper into it, but it's like the conversations that you were saying that you were having with some would have been the same thing. Like coming into the industry, it's just, I don't know what to do. Yeah. And it's that similar conversation we've had about so many things, but I would highly recommend diving into that space. And hopefully, like we said today, if you are or have dealt with people in pain, that this can give you a little bit of like a framework to think about, maybe at the stuff at the start that we talked about with just those immediate things that can buy you some time to then dive into it. And then, hey, look, there's a Discord community where you can come and ask some questions, and we're all about helping. So
asking questions.
Yeah, and again,
answering.
And this is the thing. This is why we want to push and aim to create this, for little things like this. Hey, maybe it is just a space where we talk about this? I don't know. But right now, if you are someone out there and you've got questions, sign up at the link below, come and jump in,
Pump them in there.
and just start chatting, because like these podcasts, we're here to help and chat, and it can be about any topic. You can obviously get by this podcast that I'll probably talk about it all day, but yeah.
And we learn something new every podcast. So because we're talking to people, even just each other, and we're in the gym with each other all day.
Yeah.
And we're still learning stuff from each other.
All the time.
So imagine what you could do with a community of other coaches, just throwing out ideas, chucking it in there.
And that's why I think, like I said, getting back to just when me and you were catching up, I'd love for these to just be like really practical things, and in any aspect. Like, we're talking about like PT packages and business stuff and whatever. But I think diving into the lens that we can look through, I think, all the people that we've spoken to, even young trainers and old trainers, or even just catching up with other coaches, and we'll talk about or dive into how we're training, what we're thinking about. Most of the trainers are quite interested in the level of knowledge that you have to give in that one space, because guess what, like we said, they go and take that away and put it onto their clients. I see it all the time, right? Working with Sam and seeing her apply it to her clients, working with Ads, seeing him apply it to his clients. Like, everyone that we work through at the gym has developed some understanding better, and then being able to go and help more people. That's the whole point, right? And that's what makes me froth on it, because you might not be your jam, but again, coming back to it, guess what? You got a body in front of you. You better know what you're doing with it.
So the moral of the story is learn some stuff and sign up for the Discord channel.
Also, Paulie got his scans back from his, what was it?
From my DEXA. I did my DEXA.
And he's swole.
And I got swole.
Yeah. Broke the bone density scale.
That's right. My bones are huge.
Yeah. As well as his butt. But anyway, that was just a wrap for today. But we'll catch you on the next one. Check out the show notes for all the info, and then we'll see you on the next one.
See you guys.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Coaching Collective podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Join all the action on the Coaching Collective Discord community by visiting join.thecoachingcollective.eu/sign up. See you in there soon, coaches.